Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
As we ask the question today, is Mike Johnson the kind of guy who can break the rules? Because the Speaker of the House is looking at a schedule that's not going to cooperate. Not that anything seems to be cooperating right now. We thought we had a deal Monday, a deal to avert a government shutdown midnight Friday. They had to get through all this wrangling over border funding and DHS. They got it done. It was just a matter of producing the text so the 72-hour rule could begin in the House, right? They get 72 hours to read the bill. They are pretty long, after all. And you can rest assured most lawmakers still don't read them. But that's what he's dealing with here, and that's why it would be too late to get through the Senate to hit the deadline Friday night. So the question is, Mike Johnson going to break the 72-hour rule, knowing that the very same members of the Freedom Caucus who demand 72 hours are the same people who are going to vote against this bill? So maybe there's no point in waiting. Let's get with Jonathan Tamari and see what the holdup is. Reporting for Bloomberg Government, live from Capitol Hill. Jonathan, it's great to see you. How come no text? I thought we had a deal a couple days ago.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder how solid or how worked out the deal was when they first announced it, because it is certainly taking a long time for them to put that deal into actual text. And so I don't think that there's a threat that they don't have a deal, but clearly there's a lot of details that are still being worked out behind the scenes, given the fact that it's taken so long to actually put a bill out for folks to read. And so we still don't have it here as of noon on Wednesday. And it's going to be hours at best before we see anything.
Bob Good of the Freedom Caucus, aforementioned, talking about this with the Daily Beast, Jonathan, maybe said the same thing to you. I think it's fair to say most of us who have an issue with the 72-hour rule weren't going to vote for this bill anyways. Unquote. Why wait? When this is done, why not bring it to the floor?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll wait at least a little bit. I don't think they'll want to go from 72 hours to, 1 hour, but I think they'll probably, I think there's a decent chance that they'll go less than 72 hours, considering that technically the rule doesn't apply. That rule doesn't apply when they're bringing up a bill that they're going to try to pass with on suspension, which basically means 2/3 of the vote of the House instead of the bare majority. And we're looking at, nobody wants a shutdown for one thing. And just about everybody in Congress is looking ahead to a 2-week recess, and they're going to have plans and going to want to be out of Washington. So I think the odds are they shorten that window, but they probably don't shorten it to zero.
There's word we may not see actual legislation until Thursday, Jonathan. I know this is the question everybody's asking, but do you have a sense of when they might finish their work?
That is the big thing. I mean, we were thinking we were going to get a bill Sunday and then Monday and then Tuesday. Here we are Wednesday and you're saying Thursday. So whatever you hear, it's kind of doesn't carry a lot of weight at this point because they've been missed so many deadlines so far. So I think it's quite possible that we don't see it until Thursday. Maybe we get it very late tonight, but whatever deadline they put out, don't put a ton of stock in it at this point.
Got it. Spoken from the man who knows. Jonathan, I'll tell you one thing is Mike Johnson's job quickly here is not about to get any easier after what happened last night in California. It was a special election for Kevin McCarthy's old seat, and it's going to a runoff. Despite a Trump endorsement and a McCarthy endorsement, this is going to be a May runoff, which means Johnson gets a couple more months of that seat being vacant, and what, a 2-seat majority?
That's right. If the candidate who'd been endorsed by McCarthy and Trump, Vince Fong, if he had won, I believe, a majority, he could have won the seat, wrapped it up last night. Instead, as you point out, got to go to a runoff. So a month and change of having this 2-seat majority. And so that means one person's flight delay, a person's personal obligation, an illness, really gives Republicans just about no room to maneuver, which is why we've seen so little of substance actually happen. And so much of what has passed the House has had to rely on Democratic votes because the Republican majority is just too thin.
Yeah, ask Al Green. Jonathan, good to see you. Jonathan Tamari, reporting for Bloomberg Government on the Hill. When news breaks, Jonathan's going to be among those writing the headlines on the terminal and at Bloomberg.com. So when he knows, we'll know. As we pick through the ashes of another primary night here, looking for trends, of course, that's our job, and they're not always there. But the Trump trend does seem to be one that is worth examining after last evening, not even for his own performance at the top of the ticket in states like Ohio and Illinois that were voting. This was about Trump endorsements down ballot that could resonate through the campaign cycle. And wanted to connect with Don Levy at Siena College, the Research Institute director, the pollster who helped us make our way through the special in New York. And again, on Super Tuesday is back with us now. Don, it's great to see you. I'd love to hear if you have any trends on your radar and whether you see this as a mostly good night, as I put it, for Donald Trump in his record of endorsements.
Certainly in Ohio, it was a good night for Donald Trump, with Moreno winning, outperforming a little bit relative to how some folks felt he would, taking down a candidate in Dolan who had been strongly endorsed by Mike DeWine, an extremely popular governor. Still, I think you have to come away with saying that it was a victory for a Donald Trump endorsed candidate, someone who was completely on board with Donald Trump. However, it still displays that Trump does not have, he has control of the Republican Party, but not a vice-like control, because there was still close to 50% of the vote that went to these two other non-Trump endorsed candidates.
You wonder if Moreno would have made it if Democrats hadn't spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on ads to boost his profile as their so-called preferred candidate. You think they chose wisely?
Well, time will tell whether be careful what you wish for. We saw a very difficult race in Ohio last time, Tim Ryan against J.D. Vance. The Democrats had high hopes for Tim Ryan, a well-known Democratic challenger in that state, but he fell 8 points short. And right now, you're looking at Sherrod Brown, again, been representing now Ohio for 3 terms. His feet are firmly on the ground in Ohio, but he's going to face a very difficult challenge from Bernie Moreno in this upcoming race in a state that has really gone a long way from having any sort of blue tinge to it at all.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned a pretty good night in Ohio. There was another race that we were watching closely, and that was to figure out who would face Democrat Marcy Kaptur. Republicans would love to kick this veteran Democrat out of the House. And the Trump favorite won, Derek Merrin, and did pretty well here. When you back off and look at Ohio, Don, it's amazing how the state has changed politically here. You made the point, Mike DeWine endorsing Matt Dolan, an establishment Republican. Is the transition complete in Ohio to MAGA?
I think that the Democrats are still going to look at it as a potential battleground. They have to, after all. I mean, they're on defense almost across the entire map of the United States as they approach the Senate, where they only have a very, very razor-thin majority, really because they've got 3 independents caucusing with them right now. West Virginia appears to be headed to the Republican column, so they can't lose a single seat. And this one, Sherrod Brown's seat, is going to be all important for the Democrats. They have a very good candidate. It's going to shape up as a progressive Democrat who understands Ohio against someone that is a Trump candidate in Bernie Moreno. And I think all the issues that we're going to hear on the top of the ticket are going to get repeated in this campaign. The economy, the border, and those issues are going to be very difficult for Biden at the top of the ticket and Sherrod Brown at this point in the ticket to defend. But this race, make no mistake about it, is all important to the Democrats. They have to hold Ohio if they're going to have any chance at all of keeping Chuck Schumer as the Senate Majority Leader.
Well, so with that in mind, we talked a couple days ago, Don, about the idea of reverse coattails, that in a state like Ohio, Sherrod Brown's popularity might help Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. We even saw in some Emerson polling, a different firm, of course, that I think it was 8% of Trump voters would vote for Sherrod Brown, their own senator. I wonder who helps who in this campaign?
Well, we saw a little bit of that in the, Tim Ryan. There were certainly some Mike DeWine, Tim Ryan voters in the last election. Sherrod Brown may very well help Joe Biden, and he's going to have to. But I don't think the Democrats really are thinking that Joe Biden has a very strong chance of carrying Ohio. Perhaps they're looking for Biden not to hurt Sherrod Brown in this particular in this match with Moreno. I mean, we're still going to argue over the economy. We're going to argue over whether each of the two top of the ticket candidates are suitable to hold the presidency. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever the case may be, these Senate candidates are going to be forced to defend and speak for the top of the ticket at the same time. I don't think Moreno is going to have any trouble with that. And really, I think Sherrod Brown is going to be all in on defending Biden's record and trying to put it on the ground in Ohio, where he's going to talk about jobs, he's going to talk about economic opportunity, and he's going to try to tell Ohioans that despite the fact that the rate of about 50%, the economy, who say the economy is poor, that it's not really poor. They just have to pay more attention to what Biden and in this case Sherrod Brown are telling them are happening in their state.
Amazing. As we spent time with Don Levy, director of the Siena College Research Institute, on this day after primary night. Mike Bost, Republican congressman from Illinois. Don, won in a squeaker. This is another win for Trump. He beat Darren Bailey, who was endorsed strangely by Matt Gaetz. Another strange contest in this case. This is a pretty tight one, though, and I wonder if that's more of what you had in mind with the caveat to Trump's success last night. He still won, but not by a lot.
Well, I mean, we're going to see that play out in House race after House race across the United States. And we talked a little bit about Senate control, that at this point, the map favors the Republicans regaining the upper house. The lower house, it looks like a lot of these races where you get down into district by district, that Trump's endorsement, a Trump candidate, may not carry the day. We saw that, for example, in New York 3, although it was not a full-throated endorsement from Trump, but still, these House races and the Democrats across the entire country are going to put tremendous energy into trying to regain the House. And we're looking not just at New York, California, a race in Alabama, but as you point out, a race here and there across virtually all the states in the Midwest that the Democrats see as essential to trying to regain control of the House. If their doomsday scenario, obviously, is they lose the White House, the Senate, and the House. So they're going to be working, as hard as they can on each and every one of these House races.
It's interesting. The other one that's going to go to a runoff is in California. That's a Trump-endorsed candidate, Vince Vaughn. Trump and McCarthy endorsed. Not enough to put him over the edge there with less than a minute. Don, is that the tough spot of the night for Donald Trump, that they couldn't get that done?
That is surprising. It's a little bit of a tough spot. I don't think that Trump's people are going to pay a great deal of attention to that at this point in time, because we've seen candidate after candidate, when they're in either when they win their primary or even if they're not running for re-election, by and large are falling in line. The question is this overall question of these double haters, of the folks who were the Haley supporters. To what degree are they going to fall in line and support Donald Trump? Could be doing it the way Matt Dolan did it in Ohio, where they say that ideologically I'm aligned with Donald Trump, even if I have some problems with his style. But we're going to see the Republicans who win the nominations, whether it be House, Senate, by the time we get around to the convention, are pretty much going to be nearly 100% in line. Are going to try to bring that soft Republican support with them.
He runs the Siena College Research Institute. Don Levy, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
But of course, as we're thinking about the election and how the economy and interest rate outlook could change in the interim, of course, we have a better idea of who's going to be on the ballot in November down the ballot, not just at the presidential level with Trump and Biden set to lead their respective tickets, but we had some primaries in a number of states, including Ohio yesterday. And we now know who's going to be up against the Democratic incumbent and chair of the Senate Banking Committee, Sherrod Brown. And that's where we'd like to begin now with our signature political panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are joining us. So in Ohio, it was Bernie Moreno, a Trump-backed candidate, that ultimately pulled off the victory. And Rick, I guess my question is this a signal about the power of a Trump endorsement broadly, or a signal about the power of a Trump endorsement in Ohio? Is Ohio unique or a tell?
Well, I think Ohio is a tell. I think that Donald Trump has had for quite some time, since becoming the Republican nominee since 2016, a ability to influence these primaries. We've seen it time and time again. People have, questioned whether or not Donald Trump was going to have impact in these off-year elections. And here we are in a presidential year. He's the nominee, and he's still having an impact. I mean, Moreno was, trailing Dolan 2 weeks ago. And Donald Trump came into Ohio and flipped the script. And at first we saw polls, change in almost 10% in a week. And we thought, wow, that's phenomenal. That's a lot. Well, this was a 20-point race win. I mean, this was not close at the end. And so even though he squeaked it out with 50.5%, that's a big win over a short period of time for Donald Trump. So he'll be able to herald this. The downside is that now they've got to devote resources to Moreno's campaign, because it is a must-win state. And there's already over $140 million in television placed by campaign committees for this Senate race. This is going to be probably the most, if not one of the most expensive races in America outside the presidential race.
So, Jeanne, Democrats got what they asked for last night in Ohio. They get a race against Bernie Moreno, aforementioned, for Senate. And for the House in Ohio 9, they get a Trump candidate named Derek Merrin, a congressman. Derek Merrin is going to run against Marcy Kaptur. Is Donald Trump going to be the best thing that happened to Democrats in Ohio?
First of all, we should say the headline here is that Donald Trump and Chuck Schumer both got their guy. Now, that's an unusual thing, right? And so that's really what, you look at this race and you think, wow, they both won. And, I think Democrats have to be really, really careful what they wish for here. We had some dropping of Oppo research on Moreno that obviously did not move the needle at all, except in his favor. Maybe there is more of that to come, but I think Democrats have to be very careful here. It is not clear to me that Bernie Moreno is somebody who is going to take a big loss like we've seen in some of these past races, say in Georgia or Pennsylvania in the past with Donald Trump endorsed candidates. So either Donald Trump is getting better at his picks, or, the candidates themselves are wising up. He's really untested in this regard, but I think Donald Trump had a very good day yesterday in terms of his endorsements. And I would say the losers here are number one, the polls, which really showed a much tighter race than we got. And number two, moderates in the Republican Party. I mean, if anything is clear, that they cannot make it in the current MAGA-controlled Republican Party. And that's really where the party is headed for the next at least several months, if not year.
Well, Rick, we were discussing the idea of the Trump endorsement and Trump-backed candidates and how they perform in general contests versus primaries on the evening edition of Balance of Power last night. And something that was brought up was we saw what happened to a number of Trump-supported candidates in the midterms in 2022. But a difference that was raised is that Trump wasn't at the top of the ticket in 2022. He will be in 2024, together with all of these down-ballot candidates. How does that make a difference in this cycle?
I think that we're in an era right now where all politics is national. We used to say, all politics is local, and how you vote for your member of Congress is different than how you would pick a president. And that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, that just practically speaking was yesterday's news. Today, Donald Trump is at the top of the ticket, and he will drive the Republican ballot all the way down to sheriff. And so I think that what we're going to see is in states where Donald Trump wins, and Ohio is certainly a good example, he's going to drive down ballot races, and they're going to get pretty much what we think Donald Trump's going to get. And so that actually helps his down ticket candidates because he will actually drive turnout. I think that, and this is another good example, the race you were just talking about, Marcy Kaptur. That's a district that Donald Trump won, and you got a Democrat sitting on the House seat there. So is Marcy Kaptur going to be able to get enough ticket splitters who are going to definitely vote for Donald Trump? And that district's not going to change again. It's not going to be a Biden district. And is she going to get enough to be able to outweigh that influence from the top? If I were a betting man, I'd say in districts that Trump are going to win, the House member is going to win too, and that puts her in jeopardy.
Trying to figure out who is going to replace Kevin McCarthy in California. And last night did not go very far to helping us understand that. This was, I guess, the tough spot of the night for Donald Trump, Jeanne. Representative Vince Fong, state representative, not only endorsed by Trump, but also McCarthy himself is going to a runoff. What does that tell us about that district? Is it just too crowded? Is there more at work here?
Yeah, I mean, he lived to fight another day. It's obviously not the outcome they wanted. I think in the end, he probably does come out okay in this. But, I think it does show that there are some limits to these endorsements. And, in that case, as you mentioned, you had the presidential nominee and you also had the previous seat holder in Kevin McCarthy. And so between the two of those, you would think they cover all the bases. It didn't happen in this case. And so he's going to have to fight this for the next, few weeks or months as it is to take that seat.
I know to this point we've largely talked about the primaries yesterday as only being significant for what it told us about all these different down ballot races, but it's also worth noting that while Trump and Biden won all of their respective primaries, Trump was polling 70 to 80% of the vote, Jeanne. People were still out there voting for Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, who have suspended their presidential campaigns. How significant is that?
It is significant, and I'm so glad you raised it because it doesn't get talked about enough. One of the questions we hear was how many of these votes were early. Well, increasingly fewer. And so what we are seeing is there is in the Republican Party a never Trump or Trump alternative voters. The question now is, do they come home again in the end in November? But so far, they do want to have these protest votes because they are supporting people who simply are not on the ballot. And you look at the Democratic side and Joe Biden is, polling 80, 90%. So 9 out of 10 voters in many cases. So he is not getting that similar anti-Biden vote that we have been worried about as it pertains to issues like Israel and Palestine, for instance.
Rick, we're going to be hearing from Jay Powell a short time from now. Our special Fed coverage starts in about 15 minutes here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Of course, the announcement will come at the top of the hour. And then there's going to be a conversation with reporters that will generate the headlines that produce the stories that Americans are going to be reading at Bloomberg.com, on the terminal, and elsewhere. This is key to Joe Biden's potential success, his success or failure on the campaign trail coming up here. What are you going to be listening for from a political standpoint when Jay Powell talks a short time from now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're sitting in the Biden campaign, you're looking for what is the quote that I want to retweet that's going to make it sound like the economy is out of danger of a recession or coming out of a recession, or the rates are going to come down to the point where you can make some kind of political hay with it. I mean, so much of Fed speak gets lost in the political rhetoric that it's sometimes very hard to find anything that you would point to that would be sellable politically. Powell has an incredible, uncanny ability to not make news. And so I think that's going to be the challenge for the Democrats. They desperately want to continue to convince voters in America that Biden's stewardship of the economy has been effective and that the Fed is going to start to, lower rates based on the success of the Biden fiscal plan. And there may not be anything that they can really tout today, and that'll be a disappointment for the Biden campaign.
Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, our signature panel here on Balance of Power. Great conversation. Thanks to both of you. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.